in this session, we are going to talk about the initial RFQ process. Now, by now, we all know RFQ, request for quote. In the previous session, we alluded to a request for quotes. That was initial request for quotes from the buyers. Now, in this session, we are going to, in fact, go into much more detail on the process, the sequence, and the intricacies of the request for quote process. The request for quote process is not a one-sided process. It is a process which involves suppliers, buyers, and the SPX. I would like at this stage to just recap so that we can see where we're coming from. We were talking initially about the introduction of the SPX. We then spoke about identifying opportunities. Remember, one of the milestones there was the opportunity pipeline, where we investigate broad opportunities and then also dig deeper and to investigate in more detail on which opportunities there could be that one could go after, if one could call it that. Then we said acquiring those opportunities. Acquiring the opportunities merely refers to the fact that we want to get those opportunities in the SPX system. Then we spoke about developing those opportunities and prioritizing. Remember, we spoke about the color coding, the prioritizing, which can be assisted by color coding, which is then informed or determined by a number of factors, like whether we know the buyer, whether we've met the buyer, whether we've spoken to the supplier, whether we know the suppliers or some of them, and then also the timelines. Then we spoke about sending out the alerts, opportunities to our industry and to our potential suppliers. Then we spoke about sharing the shortlist. That what we sent out, the sending out and the responses that we received from our industry, and how we actually shared that with our buyers, because our buyers are there to find suppliers. So now, in this session, we are talking about the request for quote. How the buyer goes about in requesting a quote from suppliers. The outline of this session, the role of the SPX in the RFQ process. We are going to talk about the role of the buyers, and I don't have to tell you, the buyers in the RFQ process, they are pivotal. They play the biggest role, and they are the most important role player in this scenario. We're also going to have a look at receiving the quotes. How to receive the quotes. What are the processes and the way, the mechanism in receiving the quotes. Then we are also going to investigate the management of the quotes. Now, to receive quotes, a buyer receiving quotes, there's still a lot to do. There's still a lot of work that has to go into that process. And we are going to unpack some of those interesting aspects in management of quotes. The other point that we are going to investigate, the interventions that takes place or which starts with unsuccessful contenders. At this point, we must understand that not all suppliers are successful. Not all suppliers that quote are successful. That is logical. We know that, but the SPX has a very specific role to play. And we have an obligation to not just leave those suppliers in the lurch and run away or walk away from those suppliers, because it is imperative that the suppliers that did not make it on the quoting or were unsuccessful with their quote, there may be other opportunities for them. There are definitely other opportunities. And as SPX, it must assist those suppliers who were unsuccessful in getting a second chance. So that is very important to also talk about that. Now, the first of our topics, the role of the SPX. Now, the role of the SPX, as we know, this is very, very important information for us, for all of us who are in the SPX regime, is we share our responses with the buyers. Because we must remember the responses that we receive, or the responses that the buyers receive on the request for quotes. On those responses, we as SPX, we interrogate, we investigate, we evaluate, and we facilitate that process for the buyers. So it's almost a first stop where there is a intervention to almost say, let's look at these quotes and are they really realistic or are they not? It's really just a screening process. It's a first cut screening process that the SPX's role is. And then with those responses on the quotes that we receive, we highlight the contenders who the buyer wants to engage with further. The highlighting of the contenders is really a two-way communication. As these responses come in, SPX looks at them, we talk to the buyers, we meet with the buyers, and we talk and we discuss jointly the contenders and the quotes. And then in most cases, there should be a very clear indication for the buyer whether they want to go and who they want to go with. That is based on the quote. It is as simple as that. SPX assess the quotes and analyze the reasons for unrealistic quotes. We find, and you will find, and we will always find, and in all business and in all of these type scenarios of matchmaking and business being done, interaction between buyers and suppliers, there will always be unrealistic quotes. You will find that a lot of companies would just quote to take a chance at random, and those will be seen and picked up very quickly and at a very early stage of this process. And there SPX must play a vital role in the interests of the buyers. Now, analyzing the reasons, there could be many reasons. You sitting there would know that there could be a reason, as one of them, which I mentioned, could be cynical. It could be a company who sees a tender or who has actually come in to do the quote, and they would not really want the work. We wouldn't really like that. It's not a good scenario, but it does happen. It shouldn't happen too much. It shouldn't happen easily, because you must remember our process has come quite a way now. We just mentioned how the process has developed, evolved, progressed to where we are now, where there can be quotes. And these quotes, we should, at this stage, not even think of unrealistic quotes, because we have done our checks and balances as it was discussed in our previous sessions. Now, when we're assessing these quotes and analyzing the reasons for unrealistic quotes, this could lead to national intervention. The one aspect that springs to mind in this case could be where a supplier has all the means, capability, capacity, and they are in the ballpark, or they could be in the ballpark for being accepted, or their quote being accepted. But unfortunately, in instances where they are dependent on raw materials and the raw material prices are unrealistic. I wouldn't like to mention specific sectors, but we do know that a lot of raw material price squeezes and challenges do occur, and which makes it quite difficult for your engineering shop or your manufacturer to actually convert that raw material into something which they could sell. I would like to just, apologies for that, just going back to the previous point. If we talk about national intervention, then I'm referring to, for instance, the raw material scenario which I've just sketched. So if there is a problem and there could be a monopoly on pricing, let's mention an example of, for instance, that there's only one steel mill or one aluminium smelter, or there's only one chrome smelter, or a commodity where there's a monopoly and prices are not controlled. That is where government could step in and rectify the problem. The SPX office can also involve the buyer to clarify more technical issues. We must remember the SPX is the go-between. We're a pivotal role player in facilitation of this whole process. And it can involve the buyer to clarify technical issues. We could find, and it can happen, that a buyer, after receiving a quote, would change its mind. It could happen that they would change the specs. We're not saying that happens often, but that is something that can occur, and which should be looked into, and the SPX program is perfectly positioned with its market intelligence, with the information that it's gathered over the past part of the program. As mentioned, we can, as a SPX, play a role. The initial RFQ process, request for quote process. Now, this slide was is used to just give us again for us to understand that there must be a few aspects, a few elements has to be in place before you can actually get to a request for quote situation. The NDAs, where necessary or where required, should be in place. That's the non-disclosure agreements. Without a non-disclosure agreement, the parties cannot and will not engage. That is quite an obvious one. There must be drawings and specs. For a quote, you have to have drawings, specs. In fact, the specs could be technical and they can also be commercial. So we could have the technical and commercial specs. If we talk about specs and the definition of specs, that would also appear, and you will be able to find it in your study material. Because specs has a very broad array and a range of aspects or elements that has to be looked at. Drawings is absolutely vital, so you can't do it without drawings and specs. Sending quoting information to the suppliers. If you go into any tender document or any tender advertisement, or you go to a tender bulletin, or where you look up requests for quotes, where you look at requests for proposals, requests for information. There are so many all over the place from many aspects and from many sectors in industry and business. You will find usually sometimes pages and pages of specifications or information or shall we say requirements that has to be adhered to if you stand a chance and if you want to quote. Now, in this closed environment or closed quoting environment, which we're talking about here with the SPX, in the SPX program, in the SPX scenario, there are also these very important elements of information that is needed. A buyer will be very clear, and they have to be very clear on their requirements if they are asking for quotes to the suppliers. It's a matter of making it easy enough for your suppliers to respond. A buyer would not want to make a request, a RFQ, so intricate, so confusing, so complicated that nobody even looks at it. So there is a quid pro quo which has to be adhered to. Receiving, initially, let's just look at the next point, which is receiving responses. Now, the quotes have been sent out, or the request for quotes, and now the responses are received. We must be very clear and we must understand that when we spoke about the responses on opportunity alerts, that was something totally different. That was where you actually received responses from suppliers who were interested, who showed interest and showed capability and capacity and ability and willingness to get involved or to pursue an opportunity. Yeah, it's very much down to the ground. This is where they are quoting. They are putting their lives on the line, for that matter, and that is the crux and the crucial thing of this process. Now, receiving those responses, the buyer and the OEM, or buyer or OEM, remember we said that a buyer could be a main contractor, it could be an OEM. We are clear about that at this stage. I don't think we need to go into that. A parts list, which is now a final parts list. Remember we said there you get a bill of materials, which is a very broad list. You can have lists that are filtered more, shorter, with information requested for that, and that could either be a survey, a capability survey of the industry, or it could actually be for the reason of government wanting to know what the capabilities are, the capacity. Other reasons could be that SPX, we want to actually enrich our market intelligence. So that's slightly different. So the parts list is there. The analysis of the best business case. Remember we spoke about a business case? That is also in a different context. This is more an informal term that we use for the best business case for the parts that are in the list. Say, look, we think this is a nice, this is a component with good volumes, high value, reasonably realistic in achieving within a certain time. So there are a number of aspects and criteria which we use to say, well, the business case looks good. Then the finalization of an opportunity shortlist, that is the parts list. It's referring back to the parts list, first one on the slide. That's finalizing it now. Now we can see by now, you'll probably say there are so many processes. Yes, there are. We have to have our ducks in a row. We have to be absolutely 100% sure that we have accurate information when we get to the point buyer, supplier involvement and matchmaking. And then the finalization of the supplier shortlist. See, by now is the crux. We've got the parts list, analysis of the best business case. In other words, which parts, could be all of them on the list, could be some of them, and we select with the buyer, or we suggest to the buyer which is the best. The finalization of the opportunity shortlist, that's finalizing it after that process, and then finalizing of the supplier shortlist, because we are now linking the opportunity or those parts with the suppliers that we have given them, that we have given and we have supplied to the buyer. Those are our suggestions. The next heading is the role of the buyers. Remember the first one is the role of the SPX, the role of the buyers. And in this instance, we're talking a lot about the NDA. The buyer will supply a copy of their own NDA. This NDA is sent to all the suppliers on the final shortlist. The final shortlist are those that are going to be asked for a quote. We must just remind ourselves on that. And this NDA is sent out because, remember we said earlier, no NDA in the beginning, no engagement without an NDA. The opportunity specifications. Before I get to that slide, I would like to expand a bit, just to say this NDA is to send to all the suppliers on the final shortlist, and the buyer as we said, will supply a copy of their own NDA, and the non-disclosure agreement, the buyer will not release any detailed part of information before the signed NDAs have not been returned. It is important to know that there will be no business and there will be no reaction from the buyer if the NDAs have not been returned signed. The signed NDAs are returned to the buyer and a copy is kept at the SPX office. The opportunity specifications. Now this, I would like to also go back again to our slide. The opportunity specifications, detailed drawings and other part specifications are now released. That is after the NDAs have been received. These are sent to the suppliers with instructions to quote. They're sent to the suppliers with instructions to quote. It is important for us at this stage to understand that these, now after the NDAs have been received, then business can take place, and this is what is happening. Detailed drawings and other part specifications are now released. These are sent to the suppliers with instructions to quote, and those instructions, as we said earlier, are quite stringent in many instances. There are a lot of clauses and a number of aspects that suppliers have to adhere to qualify in the process. At no stage is an indication of the price provided. They're not enticed or they're not given a sort of a ballpark figure within which it is an absolute one of those things that the supplier has to work out for himself. Suppliers are welcome to contact the SPX office for any additional information or clarifications. If they are busy with their with their quotes, if they are quoting, they are always very welcome. The SPX office is open for that. They are also told, it is communicated to our suppliers that they should use the SPX office to assist them in getting or acquiring more information and market intelligence, or if there's anything that they do not understand in the request for quote, then it is very important for them to contact the SPX center or the SPX office to assist them. Now, receipt of quotes. We have a process when we get the quotes. Now, this is the next step. The process, suppliers return the full and detailed quotes to the SPX office. So they quote and it's being sent to the SPX office. These quotes are then shared with the buyer at the weekly progress meetings. Now it's the crunch time. SPX gets the quotes and the SPX then shares it with the buyers. These quotes are then shared and there the negotiation starts taking place, and there's a little process that obviously follows on that. Now, during these meetings, the buyer will indicate whether the price is in line or not. If it's 5% off target, they may say, well, we can look at it. There are many different variations and varieties of scenarios. There are various scenarios where on the reaction of a buyer regarding a quote, they could be very harsh. They could say, no, it must be exactly there. We know that certain industries are very, very stringent on their price squeezes. We talk about the automotive industry that are very, very stringent on those. But in many instances, there's a give and take, and people will look at quotes, even if they're not spot on. The prices received are also compared to the other criteria of the company. So yes, it's a match, price match, with a commercial match with the company's capability, capacity, and whether they are happy, and whether they were happy with the general feel and the general information that they got of a company. Now, the management of quotes, that's the next step. We've received the quotes now. The SPX now intervenes or interacts with the buyers for with these quotes that have come in and that have been received. Now, how do we manage these quotes? There's a very specific aspect, or there are a number of elements that must be taken into consideration when these quotes have been received, and it's to manage them effectively. Managing the quote, if the supplier's quote is way out, you discard the supplier. That is unfortunately one of those things. Recontact the supplier if the supplier's price is not too far off. Recontact. We said that earlier. We recontact the supplier. There is always room for negotiation on price. We know that. The whole world is like that. It's the business world and all trade and buyer-supplier interactions. They have that element of give and take and negotiation. Now, I would like to just come back to the management of the quotes. The SPX office contacts the supplier and requests a second quote. This is recontacting the supplier. So the SPX office contacts them. Once this is received, the quote is once again shared with the buyer, who will make a final decision on the supplier. So there's the second chance that the SPX is actually granting the supplier. If the price is in line this time, the supplier will move on to the next phase. If the price is still too far out, the buyer will then once again discard the supplier. This is how it goes. It is one of those things, it can take some time. The supplier moves on to the next phase. If the supplier's price is in line with the buyer's base price, the buyer will continue and initiate the onboarding process. Onboarding process is a specific process which you will also find in the study material. This will start off with a site visit at the presentation to introduce the buyer's qualification process. So there is quite a long interaction and an engagement regarding the point 2 on this slide. Recontact the supplier, and there is another chance for the supplier. And if that supplier cannot get to the price, unfortunately, they will have to move on. If the price meets the buyer's fancy or the range, or it's accepted, then there will be a site visit, and that is really when business starts getting hot. Now, there is unfortunately the situation where people and certain of the suppliers will be unsuccessful. as we've just mentioned, if they can't get to the price, if they can't reach the price, if they cannot, if they didn't get the quote or the business, if their quote was offline, the interventions with the unsuccessful contenders, there is something we can do about that. Let's see what we can do. Interventions with suppliers who did not make it. The SPX program will analyze the quotes of the suppliers who were not successful. We then engage directly with our suppliers. We engage with the supplier and we try and find out why is that price not acceptable. Why is it higher? What is the reason? Maybe there was miscalculations. Maybe the supplier didn't read into the request sufficiently, or maybe they missed some of the nuances and some of the regulations or the requirements of that quote were maybe not understood. So there are many different reasons. The SPX program will then analyze and they will engage with the supplier. Establish the reasons for their quotes being way out. Now the first point says the SPX program will analyze the quotes of the suppliers who were not successful. That could be all of them, all the unsuccessful ones, the ones that were very close on their price, and then, of course, those ones that were way out. That should also, it also warrants intervention from the SPX to look into that, especially, in particular, those that have been way out on their price, because that shows and illustrates that there could be a major problem. So those suppliers who have come up or who have submitted a very, very high or a quote which was totally out of line should need special attention. This will be done in conjunction with a supplier. At this intervention might lead to a supplier development intervention. We said in the program earlier that the SPX big value add of SPX is that they have access to programs that can assist companies, in doing better, in assisting companies to improve, to assist companies in getting those quotes that they so dearly want, to get companies in line with pricing structures, commercially, technically, and this will all assist in them having a better chance of getting those quotes and being successful in those quotes. And this is a very, very important point. Just want to add to that, with this scenario in developing the suppliers and with intervention in helping and in assisting them, the analysis of the reasons, it's important that we talk about that we explain in a little bit more detail and say the analysis of the reasons for the quotes might lead to national interventions if it is found that the reasons are linked to macroeconomic issues, and that is for the government and to benefit of the government and the government development programs. In this case, the SPX program will bring it to the attention of the appropriate government department. And that is a very good point to end off the session. And that is that we as SPX must facilitate assistance of companies in the interest of the government and the government's goals. Thank you.